Welcome to the Bama News Now podcast. My name is David Preston. I'm your host, and we are here with former state representative, that is correct, former state representative Barry Moore, correct?
That is correct.
You are running for the Alabama 2nd Congressional District seat currently held by Martha Roby, who is retiring, and kind of introduce everybody who you are. And this will be your first opportunity to introduce you to myself, because I don't live in your district. I live in Mobile. So, this will be my first time being introduced to you as well.
Well, yeah, David, thanks for having me. My name is Barry Moore, like you said. I served in the Alabama legislature from 2010 until 2018. I term limited myself for 2 terms and walked away from guaranteed reelection, but I felt like it wasn't supposed to be a career. Along the way in 2017, I was asked to run for Congress because I had been an early supporter of Trump when he was running in 2016. And I felt like that we needed to step up and help the president. I felt like he was kind of battling some uphill, the swamp. We didn't know what to call it at the time, but he had an uphill battle. So we've been asked to run for Congress, and so we've stepped up in the race. And like I said, I served 2 terms in the Alabama legislature. I'm a veteran, chaired military and veterans affairs while I was in the Alabama House, was vice chair of small business and commerce. And I've owned a couple of small companies. I started from scratch. And so willing to go serve in government when needed and willing to step up and serve. And, that's at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's public service. It's certainly not a career for me. I really don't like politics. I enjoy the garbage business and the demolition and the work we do out here in the real world a lot more.
How can you say you don't like politics if you like the garbage business?
I tell everybody it's a very easy transition to make. When they approached me, when the Republican Party approached me in 2006 to run for the state legislature, I told them no the first go round, and then they came back for the 2010 election, and we prayed about it, got a piece about it. But I tell everybody that transition from garbage to politics was easy to make. You sift through all the bad stuff, you try to keep the good stuff, and some of it stinks pretty bad sometimes. So it's an interesting transition from garbage to politics. But being a small business owner, and having some veteran experience, it served me well in the district.
Yeah, you said you were an early supporter of Donald Trump. If I remember correctly, you came down here for his really first ever big stadium rally down here in Mobile at Lad People Stadium. Is that correct?
August 21st, 2015, I was the first elected official in the nation to endorse Donald Trump. That was his first stadium event, and we were there, and we were actually at the south end of the stadium in RV, or west end of the stadium, I guess it is, and they came on and said, would you be willing to endorse Donald Trump? And I had a meeting the next day with Scott Walker, governor of Wisconsin. Rubio was going to be in Alabama. They were all wanting our endorsement. And my wife and I were on that RV. We just kind of went down the hallway and said, Lord, this is above our pay grade. We're going to need some guidance on this. We said a quick prayer. We got a piece that day about endorsing a man who had less than 1% chance of getting the nomination. And so we went out on the stage. They said, do you want to go first? And I said, yeah, that'll be fine. So I was one of 4 Alabama legislators that stepped up, and I was the first to speak that day at the event. And so I became the first elected official in the nation to endorse a guy who had no chance of winning.
And then he ended up being president of the United States. I was actually at that rally as well. So
that was a great event, and yes, he did end up being president. And like I said, I was on my way out of the legislature. I had served my 2 terms. This was 15, and I knew that at the end of 18 I was going to be done. And so I was just going to come back to the private sector, but I ran as a Trump delegate, got elected, and my daughter, Kathleen, was a student at Auburn University. She ran against no one and became the youngest Trump delegate in the United States. So we had 2 delegates from the family for Trump, and the youngest in the nation, and the first to endorse out of my family.
Well, that's amazing. So why are you running for Congress?
Well, initially, some of the Trump guys asked me to run, and I felt like we probably owed it to the president to help him. I felt like he needs some people that he can trust. And I also felt like at the end of the day, I had been in the swamp in Montgomery. We didn't know what it was when we walked into 2010. It was like a minefield because we were the first Republican majority since the Civil War in Alabama legislature. So I've had some experience with fighting those fights. I have experience moving legislation, and I have a conservative voting record. And what I see the president up against, he shouldn't have to go it alone. And so he needs some people that he can trust that have been with him from day one. Alabama needs some good representation for the district. I think being a veteran and an ag science major with a small business background and being a true conservative, I think I can serve us well. And, I'm happy to go serve if the people in the 2nd District decide to send me.
And what would be some of the issues that you would focus on working to solve if and when you get elected to Congress?
Well, there's a number of things. The national debt, we've got to address the national debt. And I've said myself, I think that the president needs to hold China accountable. We owe, at the end of fiscal year 2019, we owed China $1.07 trillion. That's about, there's about 20% of our debts owned by foreign countries, and China accounts for about 7%, 6% of that total debt. And I think the first thing we need to do is send China an invoice for the $2 trillion we just printed. In addition, maybe give them a credit for $1 trillion towards what we owe them. I think that's a good place to start. I think bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., reducing taxes and regulations, because we just export the stuff we don't like, the child labor, the pollution, all those things that we require out of the U.S. businesses, those regulations and things we force them that drive up cost of production. That moves all the stuff offshore. Then we don't regulate these countries that are polluting or using child labor, and we buy the stuff back because it's cheap. If we could cut the taxes and regulations here, I think at the end of the day, we can produce competitively. And so there's some things I think we need to do, like I said, securing the borders, bringing production back to the U.S., holding China accountable. And then the budgeting process is horrible. I think that the president has had to sign a couple of budgets he wasn't crazy about. And I think we could look at a process of saying, hey, tell you what, instead of these continuing resolutions just to run the government for 6 more months, they always use that as leverage, and they say, well, we're going to shut down the government if you don't sign this horrible budget. And a lot of times with Fort Rucker in my district and Maxwell Gunter now in the 2nd Congressional District, the first people that lose income are your servicemen and women and our government employees. And so my thoughts were, if we could tie the budget process where they say, hey, if you don't pay our soldiers, you don't pay Congress, I think we can start moving the ball a little quicker. And so there's some things we can do, I think, to help start making this make sense.
I've always wondered, ever since I was a young child following politics, how quickly the budgets in Washington would get done if there was a law that says congressmen and congressional aides don't get paid until the budget is done.
That's exactly right. They'll always send a horrible budget to the president's desk and say, but if you don't sign this little continuing resolution, no matter how horrible it is, we're just not going to pay your soldiers. We're not going to pay your military, your DOT, whatever it is. And then they have strings attached. But I think the one thing that needs to be attached is the fact that if you don't pass the budget, if you don't do your job, you don't get paid either.
Exactly. Now, you said you just mentioned that you'd like to bring manufacturing back into the country, and I'm guessing that you would like to see some of that manufacturing go back to the 2nd Congressional District. But one of the things that manufacturing and industry needs is infrastructure, and infrastructure is not just roads, which roads are important, but it's also education, it's also healthcare, it's also internet, broadband internet. It's becoming almost a requirement even for farmers nowadays. So, do you have any idea that you could take to Congress with you that would help improve the infrastructure of the 2nd Congressional District?
Well, I know we've worked pretty hard when I was in the legislature to expand broadband, like you said, to rural areas. I think that's something that's going to be required down the road. As far as how we fund that going forward, I'm not exactly sure the process we would need. Obviously, there's a couple areas I think government should be involved, and that's in the national defense and infrastructure. Those are 2 areas that I don't mind government. Ronald Reagan said if it wasn't in the phone book, government didn't need to be doing it. And there's a lot of truth. We've got government doing a lot of things they've got no business doing, but there's some areas that they could excel if they wouldn't waste so much time and energy in others. So I think streamlining the government, the process, and managing the revenues, there's some investments in infrastructure to the left. Certainly, there's probably some things we could do from the federal level that could to help these local communities match some funds to allow them to expand so that they could see the economic growth that we would like to see in some of the rural areas, because we've got land, labor, and climate, especially in the 2nd Congressional District and the whole state of Alabama, that's conducive. We've got a climate that we can ship year round. We've got available land for warehousing and manufacturing, and we've got a labor force. These people, the auto industry has figured that out. We're doing some remarkable things. And so I think there's some ways we can say we're open for business on a national level, but also in this district. And with the relationship I've got with the president, I'm quite sure we'll be able to work with him to help the district. It's just a matter of getting an opportunity.
One of the issues that will confront you when you get elected fairly quickly after taking office is redistricting. Alabama is at serious risk of losing one congressional seat, and depending on the turnout, the response rate of the census of Alabamians this year could end up losing two congressional seats. I know that there's been talk in Montgomery about combining the two southern congressional seats in Alabama, first congressional district where I live, which is Mobile, and the second congressional district, which is the seat you're running for. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you and where do you think we should be redistricting if and when that we get to that point?
Well, I hadn't really studied the district lines. I was on campaigns, constitutions, and elections when we did the 2010 redistricting for Alabama. And one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to keep two military bases in one of those congressional districts. That guarantees you an appointment on Armed Services Committee. And in order to defend those jobs and those bases, we need to have somebody with some experience, I think, from the military. And like I said, I'm the only veteran in the race. I chair Military and Veterans Affairs for Alabama and passed more bills to bring the F-35 Red Tails here. We brought those bills to committee to bring them to Alabama. All the states in the union wanted those chits. A lot of them were very competitive, but we were able to do some things that allowed us to get those jets here. And I think, so I guess first and foremost, we need to make sure we keep two military bases in the districts. We need to make sure that somebody's got some experience legislating for those military bases so that BRAC doesn't come along and whack us too hard. That's the base realignment and closure, where they close bases from time to time. But as far as I hadn't really looked at it that close, I don't know. I hope that everybody will fill the census out and we don't lose a seat. Lord knows we don't need New York and California gaining seats anymore and Alabama losing them. We still need those flyover states to be represented in Congress. And so I don't consider Alabama so much a flyover state, but we really don't have the voice sometimes that some of the East and West Coast states have because of population. And so I'm hoping we'll fill out the census, and can maintain those seats. But who knows going forward until everybody does their part. But it's very important that Alabamians be involved in that process. And I've noticed the governor in different areas around the state, they've been promoting pretty hard. Some of even the cities are promoting everybody to fill out the census, because I don't think last time we participated that well. Honestly,
we actually had a better response rate than we normally do, but we need even better one this time to keep.
Yeah, what percent, David, did we have participate in 2010? Do you know?
Right off the top of my head, I don't know, but I think it was in the 70 percentile range. Maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, but I think we normally participate in somewhere around the 60% range.
I hope we can get everybody. I'd like to see a 90% participation, to be honest with you, but who knows, But, as far as redistricting, I really haven't thought that far ahead because we don't know what's going to happen in y'all's district yet. But like I said, I sure would like to I hope we can keep somebody with some military experience, and we certainly need to keep two bases in the district if we can.
I never even thought about that, but yeah, that is important, keeping two military bases in the district, because then like you said, you run into the issues of base closures, and you lose a little bit of clout in the armed services community in Washington when you.
Yeah, well, those committees, David. I mean, those committees, you may not have. I don't know how many people in Congress sit on certain committees, but in the Alabama legislature, some of those committees were as small as 7 and 8 people. But they really do control the legislative process. They can kill a bill right there before the 105 House members ever saw it. So committees are very, very important. So it's imperative that we as Alabamians make sure that we keep two bases in the district and that we have representation on Armed Services Committee, because, that's the second largest economic engine in the entire state. A lot of times it is our military spending, and certainly Fort Rucker and the high-tech jobs that we've experienced and had here, and now the Red Tails coming to Montgomery. That's big for our state.
Yeah, that's kind of like down here in Mobile. The one question I've asked every congressional candidate down here is, if elected, would they try to seek a seat on the aviation subcommittee in the House of Representatives, because Airbus has their only airplane manufacturing facility in the United States, right here in Mobile. And ever since they've been here in the United States, their representative has not been on that subcommittee. And I'm like, I think it's kind of important that our representative from this area be on that committee.
Yeah, because you represent so much of an economic engine. That when the bills came through the Alabama legislature, I was vice chair of Small Business and Commerce to bring Airbus here. and we had to waive one little clause of liability to get Airbus to come to Alabama. It was one tiny clause that said that, if I remember correctly, that the manufacturer couldn't, if there was a crash and then some people were hurt, the attorneys couldn't bypass just Airbus and sue the parts manufacturers. And so we had to put basically an umbrella there to protect, to kind of give Airbus comfort coming to Alabama. That's the kind of things you need to be on those committees, because that was the make and break for them coming to the state.
Yes, and that's important. Those kind of jobs are important. When we're seeing that with Austal having just lost out on that frigate that new generation frigate contract to the contractor out of Wisconsin. So.
Yeah, we heard about that. I was disappointed to hear they didn't get that. But like I said, we were in the legislature for bringing Airbus to Polaris to Remington, all those companies that we brought to Alabama, and we continue to grow the auto industry. It's all about letting people know you're business friendly and you want them here and you appreciate them being here. And I think we can do that from an international standpoint, as far as once we start saying to these companies, hey, y'all come back to the U.S. and manufacture. We're going to take care of you. We're not going to do our best to put you out of business.
The 2nd Congressional District is not mainly, but it is a rural district with a lot of farming and agriculture in the area. I mean, I know that the Dothan area is a big peanut growing area. What ideas do you have to help farmers out if and when you're elected to Congress?
Well, I mentioned earlier I'm an ag science major and actually grew up on a farm. We actually had row crop peanuts and that sort of thing. And so I think some of the things we need to do, and I don't know till I get there, but I would like to see us simplify these farm deals. I mean, this recent farm bill we passed restricted the age of smoking to 21, and I'm like, really, what does that have to do with agriculture? And so you start to see stuff like that in these, and a lot of these farm bills, there's so much pork in them. But again, it's leverage. It's leverage that the Democrats use on the conservative members of Congress who have farmers like we have in our district, the rural farmers. We got to secure, and we got to make sure that the food supply is secure. If you look at government, they don't want to house people. They give a lot of tax breaks for real estate. They don't want to have to worry about feeding the masses either. We've got to make sure we have opportunities for farmers to produce, and they roll the dice. I mean, when you go out and bet on the weather every year at the level that these guys bet, there needs to be a backup there. But this farm program ought to be simplified so that our farmers can do their jobs. They can take the risk necessary to put the seed in the ground to hope that it produces so that they can get a yield without saying, oh, by the way, we got to fund this program or this program or this program, and you can't smoke if you're under 21. And that's all part of this farm bill. If you don't pass it, your farmers are going to be in trouble. And that's how this thing's been done for so long. And again, I think Trump gets it. He's an outsider. He's kind of like me. There's a lot of common sense that could be used in some of these processes. And we have got some real ignorant people right now in Congress. And I don't mean to be personal, but we've got some people running the show that really have no private sector experience. They don't understand the real world. They don't care a lot of times. It's all about maintaining power and control.
How much common sense can you really have if you have a $24,000 refrigerator?
Yeah, that's right. But lots of ice cream too, boss.
Yeah, expensive ice cream too.
Yeah, lots of ice cream. But yeah, that's my point. I mean, we've got some really – I mean, somebody told me, I guess it's AOC was sitting on one of the committees. I don't know if it's Ways and Means or whatever, but she has a 430 credit score. I mean, think about that, man. You can't – if you don't do your credit no better than 430 and you're running $1 trillion budgets, somebody have to explain that to me.
Exactly. Now, obviously, we're recording this on May 6th here, so we're just starting to come out of the coronavirus shutdown here in Alabama. We've been dealing with the coronavirus for the last couple of months here in the state. How do you think that the federal government has responded to the coronavirus? Do you agree with the way they've done it? Do you think there's ways to improve it? And if so, what improvements would you like to see if something like this happened again?
Well, I think we have to. Again, this is new to all of us. I know I've talked to people older than me, never seen anything like this in their lifetime. So it was basically a boogeyman. Nobody really knew what to expect. It's invisible. You can't see it. Supposedly it was killing people. Like I said, I do think we need to hold China accountable. I think that's a good place to start because I certainly believe it came from the lab there. I don't think it came from the seafood market. There are no bats at the seafood market. And a lot of people early on diagnosed had never visited the seafood market based on my research. But I think going forward, I think the president did what he thought he needed to do. He was getting advice, and obviously some of it, the whole time, David, I thought they're not telling us something. There's something they know that we don't know, because you see this in the movies all the time where, there's this terrifying truth out here that the government don't want to tell the masses because of panic. And so early on, I thought maybe the president and his team know something. But I think sometimes, and I think he did what he needed to do early on. We had to try to flatten the curve. Stopping people coming from China was a good call in January. Going forward, I think that once we bring our manufacturing back in the U.S. and start securing our borders, I think we just have to, we have to say, hey, we don't need to start infringing on people's rights. The most disappointing thing has been the way the governor's handled it to me. I mean, I think we ought to be open back up for business by now. I mean, if it's that truly dangerous, I think the essential people that are working every day would have seen more of an impact with their population. We haven't seen that. And when you got Lowe's is open, and you've heard this and seen it on social media, you got people in Lowe's like you read about, but nobody's going to church and aren't allowed to worship. I don't see how you pick the winners and losers. You open the abortion clinic, you close the dentist down. And the requirements right now for a dentist to open up, I talked to a friend of mine today, said, man, I don't even know if I want to open back up. He's a dentist. But the stuff they're going to be required to do, I bet the abortion clinics aren't getting nearly the regulations that our health providers, our real health providers are getting.
Yeah, one of the restaurants I deliver bread to, and my other job is literally in the parking lot of the Lowe's home improvement store, and across the street from the Lowe's home improvement store is a Walmart, which for the last 2 months has literally been the only two places that have been allowed to be open. And he's like, man, can you get my bread to me early because I'm running out of bread? I'm like, you're literally like next door to the two stores that are allowed to be open. You should realize you're going to be busier than
Wow.
busier than the other stores, and you need to order a little bit more extra bread.
Yeah.
But
he's an exception, David. He's an exception to the rule. We've got so many businesses that are hurting out here right now. I've been disappointed, we didn't open back up and try to match Georgia and some of these other states around us, because the one thing we've done with our campaign, and I've been so pleased with the Barry Moore for Congress team, is that I told them, I said, we're going to stop marketing and we're going to start serving. And so when this thing hit, we started having one-on-ones with people for unemployment, the triple P loans, the economic injury disaster loans, anything we could do to truly serve our people. And we have been helping so many people, but it's one of those things. I've been proud of our team, but it's time for government to open up, because I know even when I used to own a restaurant once in my life, in a prior life, and I can tell you, it takes some time, because you got to get all this stuff has a shelf life. And so you got to get your workers back. You got to get food in the coolers, and then people are going to gradually ease in. People are not just going to swarm. There might be some areas that get swarmed, but for the most part, I think it's going to take some time to get these businesses back open. So the fact that Governor Ivey didn't give us a clear directive and says, 2 more weeks, I'll be back with some more information, I think that was a huge disservice to so many in our state.
Yeah, and the thing that kind of concerned me from the beginning of the whole coronavirus response was that we were shutting down all of these sectors of society. And I'm a student of history. My father was a history major at the University of Southern Mississippi. I've spent my childhood going to Civil War battlefields instead of Disney World and Six Flags. And so like I said, I'm a student of history, and every single challenge America's ever faced throughout its history has been able to overcome those challenges, not in spite of private sector, but because of private sector. And then I'm seeing things like stories out of Auburn University, for example. Students at Auburn University developed an attachment to CPAP machines that turned them into CPAP machines into ventilators. You had the Dyson vacuum cleaner company that took 10 days to engineer a brand new ventilator machine and said they could build 15,000 of them. I'm like, why are we shutting? And you see so many businesses changing what they make, from gowns and dresses to face masks and face guards. I'm like, why are we shutting down private sector in this country when private sector is what we need to get past this obstacle in our history?
That is so true, David. To me, the American patriots, the people of this nation, have never failed us. And I think that I agree with you. I don't. How in the world do we shut them down and think government has the solutions a lot of times when they never have the solution? They're usually the problem. And so, this whole, my concern is some of our constitutional freedoms, our guaranteed rights, whether it's the First Amendment, prohibiting the free exercise of religion and those sort of things, freedom of speech and people gathering. I don't know if we say people can peaceably assemble, and then yet we're sitting here going, well, you can't do this, you can't do this. And what scares me is how quickly the American people sort of said, okay, tell us what to do next. that is not kind of what I think of when I think of America, but they all kind of cowered in their houses. And so it worries me a little bit at how quickly we were controlled by government.
Benjamin Franklin was famous for saying, "Those that sacrifice a little bit of liberty for security deserve neither.
And shall have neither," or something like that. Yeah, he said, "Deserve nor shall have or keep." And I thought, I think I've actually thought I've mentioned that quote myself a few times, because we have really relegated our freedoms for security and in fear. And I know the Bible says we don't have a spirit of fear, so I haven't run around scared. I mean, I have been. I'm not the least bit worried. I know people that have gotten it. I know people that have been sick, but for the most part, it's less than 1% mortality, and we've shut down the greatest economy the world has ever seen in a matter of a few minutes, it seemed like.
I'm the same way. I'm like, I've been walking around. I'm like, I'm taking precautions, washing my hands, wearing face masks when asked, that kind of stuff. But I'm like, you know what? I know where I'm going when I die, and while I'm not in a hurry to get there, I'm not gonna try to do anything to stop God from taking me when He wants to take me, because I'm not gonna be able to stop Him anyway.
That's right. Yeah. And, and like I said, just not living in fear. He gives us wisdom. And like you said, we need to wash our hands, and mainly for our fellow brothers and sisters and citizens, we don't want to contaminate them. But for the most part, I think this whole thing is the government has motivated people with this boogeyman mentality that, hey, it could get you, and we don't know, and you can't see it. And boy, how quickly the American people just said, okay, like I said, tell us what to do next, sir. Like we can trust our government, really? I mean, they're aborting, 2,500 babies a day, but they're so concerned about us that they're locking us all in our house.
Exactly. So the runoff is going to be July 14th now because of the coronavirus. You're not the only one that's going to be on the ballot in the second congressional seat, or your race isn't going to be the only one on the ballot. There's going to be a runoff in the Alabama Senate race as well. Do you want to take a minute to kind of give your thoughts on how that race is going, and what do you see? How do you see that helping or hurting turnout in the second congressional district?
About on my race, or how the Senate race would impact our race?
Yes.
Well, I think the turnout will be a little better because there's people obviously that support one of those two candidates. The fact that this thing has been moved back, I don't know. Historically, we've never seen anything like this, so I'm not sure about absentee ballots and all that. But I think there'll be quite a few more absentee ballots probably this go around. But I feel like it helps us. I think that as far as getting a good turnout, I think that both of those candidates in the Senate, whether it be Sessions or Tubble, they're going to have a base that's going to turn out. And so I figured it'll help us on our numbers, and we've been well pleased. I mean, since the primary, we pulled dead even, and we spent $200,000, and we spent about $270,000. The other fellow race spent $2 million, and we're dead even in the polls right now. And honestly, we got the House Freedom Caucus, Club for Growth, and the Eagle Forum endorsements since the primary. So we actually have resources now that we didn't have. So we're kind of excited about it. I think the turnout will be because of the Senate race will be a little higher than a typical runoff, but with the virus, who knows, man? All bets are off,
Exactly. And are those the only endorsements you've received in this race, or have you received more endorsements?
Well, Eagle Forum and the House Freedom Caucus, Club for Growth, and then there's a couple of others I'm trying to remember. I don't really know them all off the top of my head, David. I got another one yesterday, American Works. It's about protecting American jobs. And let me say this too. We're on our Facebook, we're launching a bringbackUSAjobs.org. That's going to have a petition, and I'm encouraging people to go and be more Republican for Congress, and to actually log in, follow us, and go ahead and sign that petition once it's up and going, so I can take that to Congress and try to make sure that we get as much involvement as we can from a standpoint of, hey, people, we want to bring jobs back to the U.S. And we got Christian Coalition endorsement too early on. That was actually before the primary.
And is Facebook the best place for people to reach out and learn more about you and your campaign, or do you have a website or Twitter or anything like that?
All of the above. We've got Facebook. We're above 10,000 people, because when I was in the legislature, I made it a point to be transparent. And even when we were voting on bills, I would put stuff on my social media, no matter what time the bills passed, to keep my voters informed. Over time, we built a great following there. So the Beermore Republican for Congress Facebook page has got over 10,000 followers now. But yeah, I encourage people to go there, and if they need some help on unemployment or anything like that, please reach out. Then www.bearmoreforcongress.com. That's our webpage, and we got links on there from the president. We get daily emails working with the White House on releasing what we're putting in Alabama, the resources, and what the president's doing to help our state. So we're in constant contact with the White House on that. So that's 2 areas. And then I'm on Twitter. It's Rep Barry Moore, I think is how it is on there. I don't like Twitter as much, but I know the president uses it, but I don't like it as much as I do Facebook. So.
I understand. I think Twitter is more my generation and younger, and then now everybody's going to TikTok. Don't get me started.
Yeah, there's so many trolls on Twitter, though. It's just so vile sometimes. I don't enjoy it that much, but it's a good way to communicate. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to let the listeners and the voters of Alabama know about you or your campaign?
No, sir. I appreciate you having me on, David, and just ask them to keep us in your prayers. We don't want anything the Lord don't want for this nation, but we're happy to go serve if He chooses.
Because this is a new podcast from BamaNewsNow.com, we don't have any sponsors yet, but you can help change that. If you're a small business owner or a community organization that would like to get your message out to a engaged audience of Alabama listeners and readers, reach out to us today at david@BamaNewsNow.com. And Bama News Now is all one word, about the different advertising and sponsorship options we have available. We have an engaged readership on the site, and I have no doubt that we will have an engaged listenership on this podcast. Again, reach out to us today at david@BamaNewsNow.com for more information. Welcome back to the Bama News Now podcast. I am your host, David Preston. Let's talk about the interesting case out of Georgia of Ahmaud Arbrery. If you're unfamiliar with what happened, let me give you a brief review of what's happened, and we can go from there. Back in January, 3 white men jumped in their trucks with their shotguns and pursued Ahmaud Arbrery, who they believed to have committed a breaking and entering crime in their neighborhood. Once they cornered Mr. Arbrery, who at that point was jogging down the street. He decided to struggle for the gun, and during that struggle for the gun, both the man that was holding the gun he was trying to wrestle out of his control and the man in the bed of the pickup truck fired upon him. It took several shots, but eventually one struck him fatally and killed him. This series of events is not in dispute. Ahmaud Arbery's family's legal representatives openly admit that is him on the surveillance video showing someone fitting the description of Ahmaud Arbery entering into a home that was under construction in the neighborhood, looking around and then running off once one of the neighbors walked outside to see what was going on. The father and son duo that have now been charged with murder by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation do not dispute that they got into their vehicle with their shotguns to pursue Mr. Arbery down the street. During that pursuit and resulting altercation, Mr. Arbery is killed. Here's where I stand on the issue. It comes down to, was the citizen's arrest that they were claiming to be making legal or not? That's what the legal question boils down to. In my opinion, it was not a legal citizen's arrest. And here's why. Citizen's arrest statutes are usually only saved for crimes that are committed, and you witness that crime in the immediacy of it taking place. What I mean by that is, if you are in a city park and you see a man mugging an old lady in that park, you have every right under citizen's arrest statutes to detain that mugger until the police can arrive and take him into custody. That is what citizen's arrest is for. If you do not have personal knowledge of the crime being committed, then you cannot try to make a citizen's arrest. What I mean by that is, if you do not witness Mr. Arbery walking into the vacant house that was under construction, and let's face it, we've all done that in our lives. I've done it. I've done it as a kid. I've done it as a teenager. I even have done it as a young man in my early 20s. And I'm not saying that I won't do it again, because we're all curious human beings. Is it a crime? Technically, it's breaking and entering. A crime that most likely, in and of itself, because nothing was stolen, so it doesn't make it burglary, as others have claimed, and it doesn't make it a felony, but it is breaking and entering, a crime that most likely would not have been prosecuted in this case, or if it was prosecuted, most likely would have been pled down to probation, because that's how unserious the crime is. But these men that have been arrested for the crime, the McMichaels, did not witness with their own eyes this crime. They heard about it secondhand from neighbors that had called them and said that Mr. Arbery had committed the crime. That does not give them the legal right to pursue Mr. Arbery and detain him for a citizen's arrest, in my opinion, because they did not witness the crime in the immediacy of the action. Now, with that said, that, in my opinion, makes them the aggressor in this situation, because they took the premeditated action of getting into their truck with their shotguns and pursuing this young man. Now, once we arrive at the scene where Mr. Arbery was fatally shot, we have to only consider the information he had at the time to determine if he was acting in self-defense or not. That means that from Mr. Arbery's point of view, yes, he probably knew that he had just committed a breaking and entering crime. But at that point, all he knew is he had two white men with shotguns in a pickup truck, having him cornered on the side of the road. Also, being a young black man, he's probably had a conversation with his parents, maybe even more than once, a conversation that black parents all throughout the country, but especially in the American South, have had with their kids, especially their sons, about the history of this country. But that conversation says that when two or more white men confront a single individual black male with guns, that there is a strong likelihood that that young black male is not going to walk away from that confrontation without either serious injury or death. With that knowledge in hand, Mr. Arbery probably felt that he only had two options: either fully comply with the demands that these strange white men were making to him, that he had no legal obligation to comply with, or fight for his life. While probably the smarter option would have been to comply with the demands that these white men were making of him, because ultimately what would have happened is the police would have been called, and they probably would have questioned him. They might have even arrested him. But like I said, most likely that even if this case had been prosecuted, he probably would have just gotten probation at most. He had no legal obligation to do that, because under Georgia's stand your ground defense law, he has no legal obligation to retreat or comply with an illegal order. And remember, like I just said, I felt like these men had no legal right to make a citizen's arrest because they did not personally witness the crime that Mr. Arbery is now being alleged to have committed. So therefore, any demand that they would have made in the situation where he was cornered would have been an illegal demand, because they were the aggressors of the situation. So they don't get to claim self-defense in this situation if they're the aggressors. If you're the aggressor of a situation, you have the legal obligation to de-escalate the situation. And de-escalation from the McMichaels' point of view would have been never to get in their trucks and never pursue this young man in the first place. But even if they did, never present the firearms during the confrontation and take their chances in a physical altercation with Mr. Arbery. So in this situation, Mr. Arbery has the legal rights to self-defense, and he chose to exercise those rights to self-defense by struggling for the shotgun that was pointed in his face. The only option he felt that was given to him that would have given him any viable chance of survival, because I'm sure he felt terrified of this situation, and I'm sure he felt like that if he had complied with these guys' requests, they were going to shoot him anyway, regardless if they had the desire to do that or not. Because remember, as we've learned in other prominent self-defense cases in the past, self-defense isn't about what the intention of the aggressor is in the situation, but what the person claiming self-defense says they feel like was the best option for their safety. In this situation, I believe that Mr. Arbery had the right to self-defense, and Mr. Arbery exercised that right to stand your ground self-defense because he chose to fight back when two strange white men that the law will probably ultimately end up saying had no legal right to make a citizen's arrest pointed guns in his face. With the history that this part of the country that we live in has going well past the Civil War, when two or more white men confront a single individual young black male, things usually don't turn out well for that young black male, regardless if you want to downplay the racism card or not. I'm not even getting into the racial aspects of this case, other than to fully recognize that this country has a history of, and I am recognizing that fact, because that's probably what Mr. Arbery was thinking during this situation. And to deny that fact is just to deny history and to not recognize other people's history and other people's experiences. And you can do that, but then you have to question yourself, are you denying that life experience and that history because of the color of your skin? Or are you denying that history and somebody else's experience because you refuse to accept that somebody else's reality might be different but just as valid and just as important to them as your reality is to you? Because remember, not everybody grew up under the same circumstances, and everybody's life experiences is different. And if you're white, you can't even begin to pretend to know what it is like to have grown up as an African American in this country. Thank you for tuning into the BamaNewsNow.com podcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you have any comments about the interview that we did with Representative Moore, or any comments or feedback about my commentary about the Ahmaud Arbery case, please feel free to reach out to me at david@bamanewsnow.com. Thank you for joining us. Joining us again next week when we interview Mary Palmer, the author of a new book called The Boynton Oak. And we have an interview with the Penelope House to talk about domestic violence situations in the coronavirus pandemic. Music for today's episode was provided by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com. That is AUDIONAUTIX. _COM.